Okay, Ed, we're all set.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I will note that Linda Scott called earlier today and she is suffering some after effects from her COVID vaccination, so she may not be joining us tonight. And I know that Francis Gagnon had a conflict with work, so he won't be here. Hopefully before too much longer, we'll have Patty Gagney and Steve Morgan joining us. In the meantime, we've got Jennifer and Roger here with me and Dennis Dote. And of course, I'm Ed Barrett. The first thing I thought I'd ask is whether anybody had any other issues that they would like to put on the table in addition to what I sent out with the kind of annotated charter version that I provided earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else that people could see or could think we ought to add? I will mention Linda Scott had two suggestions. One is that we consider adding a preamble to the charter. She noticed that there was one with the model city charter that I provided earlier.
Mm-hmm.
She thought that might be a good idea. She also pointed out, and I think it's covered but not clearly in what I sent out, that depending on the term, length of terms and how elections would be scheduled, we would also have to give some consideration to how long the president of the city council is elected for.
Right.
So right now it should be obviously lined up with an election. So those
Yeah.
were the two things that she mentioned. Anything else anybody else saw?
I have nothing else.
No, I
Nope.
don't see anything else at this point.
Okay. Well, one of the things we had talked about is on the agenda for tonight is to be sure that we get some public Yes, Dennis, you had something?
Yeah, I just actually saw Patty has raised her hand in the attendees, so she must have joined. I want to just get her in here for you. So give me 1 second and
Sure.
Patty is coming in. She's just caught in cyberspace right now. There she is.
Here we go.
Hi, Patty, how are you?
Hi, good.
We were just talking about whether anybody had anything else they wanted to add to the list of issues that we should discuss that were covered in the document that I sent out earlier. So do you have anything else, Patty?
No, thank you.
And did you hear Linda had two suggestions. One is that we add a preamble to the document. And the second is that we be sure to deal with the term of the president of the council, depending on what we do with elections and council terms and stuff like that, that we'd have to make sure that was coordinated. And if you didn't hear, Linda is not feeling well tonight, so she called in and asked to be excused. And of course, Francis had a work conflict. So
Okay.
what I thought we'd do next is maybe talk about trying to get public comment into the process so that we can get that in before we start making decisions. And I put together earlier today and sent out a list of, I think it's always helpful when you're trying to get public comment to ask people to give people specific things to comment on. Not just say, hey, anybody I see anything out there in the charter they want to change, because that's a little bit too broad and some people would not even know how to react to it. So I put together and sent out earlier in an email today a list of what I would consider to be some of the major issues or the most important issues that we're going to potentially be talking about. And I can just quickly run through those.
Mm-hmm.
The first one has to do with the mayor and whether the mayor should be allowed to vote on all issues before the council. Right now, he's limited to when there's a tie vote or when somebody on the council is missing or cannot vote for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
If he's given a vote, then we have a even number of votes. So we either have to reduce the size of the council by 1, taking it down to 6, or add an additional position to the council, taking it up to 7, plus taking it up the whole total number up to 9.
9.
If we added someone, the suggestion's been made that would be an at-large position. That way, if we do go to staggered terms, you would have at least one citywide city official on the ballot every 2 years. So one election would be the mayor, the next election it would be the at-large position on the council.
Ed,
Next,
that
yes.
that matches the school committee, right, as far as membership, because there's seven
There are 9 members on the school committee.
members plus an at-large, 7 wards plus at-large plus the city council rep.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay, but I guess I was thinking of the fact that school committee has 1 at-large.
Right. So it would be the
Representative.
same on both. The only difference between the 2 bodies then becomes that the school committee elects its chair, whereas the mayor is elected by the city.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is whether the mayor should continue to have exclusive authority to appoint members to city boards and commissions and to ad hoc committees. That has been a bone of contention for some time. Number one, in terms of ad hoc committees, it's not clear what an ad hoc committee is, because there are times when the council has actually created a committee and come up with an appointment system that was other than the mayor doing it. That created some disputes between people. And there's also, I think, some concern, particularly if we go to longer terms, that the mayor might be in a position to too easily pack committees. So the alternatives that could be looked at there, one is the mayor could nominate and the council could confirm. That's what's done with the school committee chair by charter, or the school committee council rep by charter, or the council could select. I think that's what they do over in Auburn, right, Dennis?
Yes, I believe you're correct, Ed. Yep.
So there are a number of alternatives. When the council does it, it can be very complicated, time consuming. So the alternative that appeals to me would be, depending on what we do with the mayor's position, is the notion of the mayor nominating and the council confirming. That would ensure, I think, some tendency toward moderation, which might be a good thing these days.
Yeah.
The next one is age requirements for city council. Right now, you have to be 20, or if council to be elected, you have to be 20 years old. It's been suggested we make that just the voting age of 18. So that's another issue. That was discussed the last time in 2010. And there was some feeling that, you know, having a little bit of an older thing might not hurt. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, good. How you doing?
Just fine.
Bye.
We are going over what I call a list of major issues that we might put out for people to comment on at a public hearing.
Yep.
And I sent that out earlier today. I don't know if you've had a
Yep.
chance to
I
look
got
at
it
it.
right in front of me.
Okay. The next thing on the list is staggered terms for city council and school committee. And again, there are options there. The model charter recommends 4-year terms with elections every 2 years. Portland and Bangor have 9 counselors, and they do an election every year for 3 of them. So those are 2 different models that are potential there. The question has been raised about whether we should adopt instant runoff ranked choice voting for the office of mayor. And the question came up whether we should do that for city councilor too, but I don't know that we would be interesting, Dennis, to have the city clerk let us know how often we have more than 2 candidates running in a district. I think it's very infrequent. In fact, it's probably much more frequent. We only have 1 person running for office.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think having the city clerk probably, explain the logistics around, ranked choice voting and just what that brings. I think that would be good.
Yeah. Because obviously it's a more complicated process in terms of the technology that's required.
Yep.
The other thing that I think would be interesting there is a little bit of history on the number of new counselors that end up being elected in each election in recent years. I know the last time we talked about staggering terms, The feeling was it hadn't really been a problem because there hadn't been that kind of dramatic turnover on the council.
Right.
But I think that's changed. You know, the council that hired me, 6 of the 7 didn't run for reelection. The next council, I think it may have been 4. And I know it just seems like there's been a lot more turnover on the council lately. And the same thing with term limits. I can't think of anybody. Can you think of anybody recently who's been to 3 terms to the council? It's tended to be 1 or 2. There probably have been a couple who went for 3, but it hasn't been very frequently. So that hasn't been a big issue here.
No, one of the last, Ed, that I could probably recall is Mayor Carey when he was a councilor. You know, I think he went 3 terms. But outside of that, you're right. I can't think of one right now that's, well, there's some that I guess if they run again, they could be on their 3rd term, I guess, but they haven't announced. So I don't know if they're going.
Right.
It was a lot more common back in the 70s and 80s for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was up in Bangor, there was a council member in Brewer who was in his, but it doesn't seem to be a big issue at the moment. But anyway, it's worth discussing. There's the issue of should the charter include a provision for recall that discussed before. That's something that could be discussed again. There's also the issue of disqualification. Right now, there's some language in the charter that ties disqualification to being convicted of a felony, effectively being convicted of an offense of moral turpitude. That was changed in 2011 because he felt that moral turpitude was undefined. Now there's kind of a feeling that maybe we should consider that again. And the other thing I realized, and I picked this up when I was looking at the model charter, there is no conclusive system in our charter for determining when somebody has forfeited their office. And there have been, are you still hearing me?
Yeah.
There have been situations recently where questions have been raised about whether somebody forfeited their office. A question was raised about residency, whether a person really lived where the person said they lived. There's no way for the charter to determine that. So I saw in the model charter where the council itself would be the final determinant of it qualifications. So that if there was a complaint that somebody had forfeited the office and they refused to leave, that would give the council a way to remove them. So I think that's something worth considering. At the moment, we have the strange system with planning board members and board of appeals where we have the regular members and alternates. There's been discussion over the years of whether we need the alternates or whether the alternates should become regular members. There's also an issue there. Both terms of those groups is 5 years. So your term is a 5-year term, which seems rather long. So whether we want to take a look at the length of the term. And there's some very strange language about planning board members. They have a 5-year term, but they cannot serve more than 10 years in a 10-year period, in a decade, over a 10-year period. So if you were appointed to a 2-year term and then got a full 5-year term, you could not be reappointed for another 5-year term because you'd exceed the limit. That's just, I would think that's probably a real pain in the neck for the city clerk office to keep track of, but we've mentioned before, we have the issue with the budget process being very different under state law for the school committee now than it used to be that we have to deal with. And then Heather asked whether we would like to revisit the bond limitation. right now, if we want to go out and bond for a project where the bond amount would exceed 50% of the prior year's tax levy, you have to go to the public. So I think at the moment, that's probably somewhere in the $8 million range. I forget the exact amount. We did have to go out, for example, on the middle school. And I think they had to go out on the high school expansion and have that, take that to referendum because it exceeded the limit. So there's a question whether we want to take a look at that. Those were the big issues that I had that I thought would be good to specifically try to get some public comment on. Anything else that people can see that they would like to toss on the list?
Well, one change that I hope a possible change that I hope we discuss, and we may or may not want to put it on here, is, potentially allowing a city councilor who moves from his or her ward to at least serve out that term, without being immediately disqualified or forfeiting their seat, which I think is what would happen now, even though the charter may be a bit unclear.
Right. That would happen now.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I don't have it right in front of me. I got here late to this meeting.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
sure.
You can?
Yes.
How's your day going? I like the idea, and I'll tell you this, of the mayor becoming a paid position, not the $5,000 thing. And I love Mark Carey. He's one of my best friends, and I think he's doing a great job. I complimented him today on the committee that they came up with for the poverty thing. But I see Jason Levesque, who's full-time mayor, probably not getting paid as a full-time mayor, but I see what the Portland mayor gets. And I think that position could use a full-time person. I see some of the ideas that Jason's come up with that have, and he's got the time and energy to do it. Mark has to still make a living as well as volunteer his time for this. That's my thought on it. I'm open to discussion.
Anybody else have a thought on that? It is included on the document as issue, I think.
It is on this?
I think it, not on this one, but it is on the annotated version of the
Yes.
charter that I sent out.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
I think I have that marked in there.
So the
I
current
think,
amount,
I'll just throw out it is about $5,000. It's somewhere right in that range. And the way it currently works is that the council can set the salaries for council members and mayors, but any increase only goes into effect after the next election.
Yep.
So you could vote today to increase the mayor's salary to say $7,500, but that would not change until after the next election.
Yeah.
That's a
I
good
will
thing.
point out that it might be something we want to take a look at because councils are very reticent to raise their salary. Politically, it's a problem for them. So it might be easy for them to make some adjustments if we made a recommendation, even if it wasn't something that you put in the charter. Patty, you had a question?
just to clarify, because you popped out a little bit, is the current amount that the mayor receives? What is the current
About
amount?
$5,000.
It's about 5,000.
About
I want
5,000.
to say it's 5,400 or something.
I think it is 54 and the council is 2,700,
Yeah,
I think.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
The counter argument to paying the mayor more, there's a couple of those. One is Portland. if you watch what's gone down there over the last few years, the full-time separately elected mayor has created a lot of controversy and disagreement and fights between first the council and the mayor, and then more recently, the city manager and mayor. So that's one issue. Gets to be a little bit of a who's in charge kind of question. And the second thing I've often wondered is, if you had a full-time mayor, you'd be potentially putting people in a situation where they couldn't run for mayor because they didn't want to give up their regular employment
Mhm.
to be a full-time mayor. So I think that's something to consider as well.
True.
It's my thought.
Or they'd have to wait till they're 65 or 70. Or in
Yes,
my case, 95 when I stopped.
I apologize if I keep freezing. My internet is not doing very well tonight, but so what I thought then is we ought to talk about when we wanted to do the public hearing, so that we can start getting that set up, which means we also ought to spend some time talking about when we want to meet, because it looks like Francis may have a continuing problem with meeting on Wednesday. And Dennis, when is the council going to adopt a budget?
Everything looks like we're on track. At the latest should be May 4th is what we're targeting for adoption. So, and it went well last night, so I think we're on the right track.
Okay, so one possibility is that would free up Thursdays. So we could certainly look at moving to Thursday. The other thing that I thought of, because I'm trying to remember that Francis's days off were what, Monday, Tuesday or something like that?
I don't recall.
The other alternative I thought of is we could do Monday nights other than planning board nights. So the planning board meets the second and fourth Mondays, so we could literally do the first and third Mondays as an alternative.
All right.
Pulling out my calendar. And I can hang, if you hang on a second, I can probably check and find the email from Francis about when he wasn't able to, when his days off were. Let's see.
Of course, you know, the finance committee meets on every other Monday, so it doesn't necessarily follow on the second and fourth, but and we start at 5:30.
I just pushed the wrong button.
Either one, Monday or Thursday work for me.
Okay,
Yep, Thursdays are even better for me, yep.
My only conflict with Thursday is the first Thursday of the month is airport board. So I have that at
Ah.
5:30. But that's just once a month.
let's see. Yeah, he says his current days off are Monday and Tuesdays. Why don't we, let's check back in with Francis to see for sure if how much of a problem it is.
Mhm.
Get the impression Thursday would be preferable for everybody else, But-
Yes,
but non-finance committee planning board Mondays would work.
Or airport committee meetings.
Or airport committee meeting. So we can take a look at that and get back to people. I was thinking actually the sooner we can schedule something for the public, probably the better. So if we could do something that first week in May of the week of the 3rd. And if Francis isn't available on, you may not know about the budget on the 4th for sure, right, Dennis?
It's possible we may not, but that's certainly they haven't indicated anything that's been on our schedule as the adoption date, and based on everything, I feel like we're at least moving that way. Where it lands, I don't know, but certainly I expect it to be adopted on the 4th.
Well, I would be loath to schedule anything on the 6th till the council for sure is acted. So maybe we ought to take a look at the either keeping it on the 5th if Francis could make that night, or moving it to the 3rd, which would be that Monday. I don't think that's are there any conflicts on the calendar on that day, Dennis?
Looking at that now, I don't see anything. No, I think that'll be okay.
Okay, so why don't we'll check
think-
with Francis and make sure he's okay, and we'll also check with Linda to make sure that's not a problem for her, because I know that she does have, she's obviously on the planning board, but I don't think she has any other conflicts on those Mondays. And we can potentially get that lined up, because I would also like to send something out as early as we could, to get the public potentially commenting. And I was thinking, in addition, obviously, to just doing the normal thing with the media and all that, we should probably send an invite to current and past council members and mayors, people who've been on the planning board, some of the city boards and commissions, people who've generally been past council members, people like that who have some insight into city government and may have some positions and some views on what should be done. Maybe send it out to the people who were on the charter committee back 10 years ago who are still around. Get their views and opinions. So that would be kind of my suggestion. Hopefully we could get some people to show up and do it through a Zoom meeting. Also give people the opportunity to send in their comments in writing, because some people may prefer to do that. I don't know if Larry Gilbert's back in town. I suspect Larry has his opinions, because he certainly showed up at the last charter review. Give him a chance to raise any issues that he might want to raise. Does that sound like a good plan going forward?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And Ed, I
Okay.
just offer some staff support around that. I think Dottie would be able to help with distributing and the surveys, but also collecting and kind of gathering that and summarizing it for everyone. So I think she'd be great to help with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion. Do we want to actually consider doing a survey?
It
Maybe
just,
we-
fairly easy. I think that, a Survey Monkey, something like that, we could, maybe one suggestion would be to see what we could get through, your typical, I think the way you've structured this is quite easy for folks to just comment and maybe provide some initial feedback, but depending on what we see there, survey could certainly be done. It's a bit more targeted and maybe more yes or no kind of trying to get some data that way. So just either way is fine though. And I think we could certainly do it however you guys like.
Any thoughts?
So this would be just a survey that anyone could take if they wanted to. We wouldn't be
Yep.
actively soliciting certain people or groups or committees to take that survey. Yeah, yeah. Just as long as
Yeah, I
just
think,
as long as we're aware that the survey could show very strong support for some elements that we as a committee might not be too fond of.
Mhm.
there's always that problem. So yeah, why don't we look at it this way? Let's go ahead and do what we've been laying out here in terms of trying to get some targeted feedback on the process. And obviously that would be open to anybody other than targeted people, but other people in the community who might want to respond. And then we can see how that goes. And if we want, we can decide to do a follow-up actual survey and make that available to people.
Mhm.
Sound like a plan?
Yep.
Patty?
I guess one of my concerns would just be the time frame that it takes to get a survey out, to get the results, plan our next meeting. Are we going to have everything in and calculated by then? And this is the first time, obviously, I've served on a committee like this. And I thought tonight we would be getting into the meat and potatoes of the list. So I'm a taskmaster, like, let's dive in, let's get going. This is our second Zoom meeting,
Yeah.
but we haven't talked about anything specifically with the charter yet. And maybe that's the way this is supposed to work. I don't know, but I want to get to work.
Yeah, I wanted to get the public comment thing out of the way so that we had a plan in place before the meeting got over. But I certainly have no objection to starting to go through the list of issues that that we've identified so far, to at least have some preliminary discussion.
It'd be nice if the other two were
Some of the
here
issues,
as well, but
yes. We could always
Yeah,
go
yeah.
back and make up summaries and
Mhm.
let people respond to it that way. And I wouldn't necessarily consider anything at this point to be final.
Mhm.
It might be, yeah, let's keep that on the list and keep considering it, or let's throw that off and not worry about it anymore. And go from there. That sound like a reasonable way to go?
Yes.
Probably
if,
the
yeah.
easiest thing. Go ahead.
And if we do a relatively, straightforward Survey Monkey test, and we put, a deadline on there, so that's just not an ongoing thing. And there was certain, as I understand Survey Monkey, the results would be computed as it goes. So once it closes, we'd have the results. There wouldn't really be any computation to do or anything. We'd have it right then and there. I think,
Well, let's see how the public comment goes, and we can decide if we want to do something more in depth as we go, as we continue along. Okay, turning to the substantive issues to keep Patty happy. Some of you may not have heard this, but at the beginning, I did talk to Linda. She suggested that we include a preamble to the charter. I have no objection to doing that. Just a matter of somebody coming up with some of the language. So I could certainly ask Linda to put something together and propose it for us to take a look at. Getting into some of the bigger issues, I'm going to just go through this section by section. And I apologize, I did not add to the Word document page numbers, but we'll do sections and stuff. In section 1.02B, talking about the mayor. The question arises, the mayor, as you would know right now, is not really a full member of the council and has only limited authority to vote. Question is, should the mayor have the ability to vote on all issues? That's been discussed before. There were some always been some differences of opinions. I personally think the mayor should have the right to vote. He is the only, at the moment, citywide elected municipal official on the city side of the house. And to some extent, putting him in a position where he votes to break ties, or when somebody's absent, he often has the swing vote in that situation, which puts him in kind of an awkward position that he's not voting normally. And as I recall, Kathy always calls him last. So he's the one. And you start seeing these little games being played where, oh, somebody's going to be gone. Let's get this item on the agenda because
Right.
we know we can get it passed
That's
because that person's not here. And when I first came to Lewiston and I was dealing with Larry Gilbert, my impression was that the mayor's job in Lewiston was a position looking for a function and lacking any clear direction to what the position is. Mayors have tended to make up their own idea of what it should be. So Larry wanted to be a very activist mayor and had to constantly be redirected to the fact that the council had to vote on stuff. that we've had other mayors who've been very disengaged. So that's kind of my thinking, is it would make sense, and certainly that's the system in a lot of other cities where the mayor is a member of the council. In the city I was working for in Texas, the mayor was a member of the council, voted on all the issues. So that's kind of my position. I don't understand why we wouldn't, but I'm open to hearing anybody's counter position on that. Roger, you wrote this thing. Why did you do that?
Yeah. We had some discussion of that way back, but not very much because it was, we were working off the old charter, the 1939 charter, in which in many ways the mayor was quite powerful, largely through his power of appointment and the fact that he was a voting member of the finance board, which rivaled the city council in many respects, had almost as much power as the council. So there wasn't much interest in having a very strong mayor at that time. But I kind of agree with you, though. I would like to see the mayor have a vote. I think this closely ties into the other issue of what then do we do with the council? Do we increase it, decrease it?
Yep.
Do we have at-large members? Otherwise, we have an 8-vote situation. But I would, I'm pretty much in agreement with what you just said in respect to the mayor voting.
Other comments?
I
Yes,
agree.
Steve. Steve
I
agrees.
agree pretty much with what you said. I think that the 8-vote issue is going to come up from time to time. And what do we do there? We got to have a contingency plan in place for when that happens. And an at-large counselor, I don't know if I'm 100% behind that, but anyway,
Patty,
I'm open.
I am in opposition of this. I think it's nice to have separation of the mayor and the council having more power to get things through. So it's not the mayor dictating what's going on. I like the fact that the mayor is there to break a tie vote if there's an absent member of the council. And I think it's just a lot of unnecessary, let's change everything around to add a person or subtract a person. I think it's working the way it's supposed to now. And I just don't see a big need to shake it all up, you know? And back to the appointment process too. I mean, elections have consequences. And if we elect a mayor, that mayor has the choice of choosing their committees, appointing their committees. That's part of the role. I mean, I don't see a big problem with that either. I mean, in one regard, they don't have all the power at city council meetings for the voting record, but on the other hand, they are the mayor, and being able to appoint different positions, I think is an important part of that.
Jennifer?
I do like the idea of the mayor having a vote. And I actually really like the idea of going and increasing the size of the council by having one at-large councillor. That's one thing that I've kind of always wondered why Lewiston hasn't had that position. I think that's a way to move forward with things, but.
Steve?
I want to go back to what Patty said because I experienced it with Larry Gilbert as my mayor while I was on the council. The mayor can be very influential. Larry's a strong voice, and many times that happened. Now, in order for a councilor to speak, he's got to raise his hand and ask permission from the mayor to speak, and the mayor calls on it. He gives his opinion or states what he wants to state. Well, the mayor, at the end of it, if he doesn't agree, he's got the floor, and he can continue talking, you know, and overwhelm the conversation. In other words, maybe you just brought up 2 or 3 good points that do discussion, but if Larry didn't, I'm using Larry as an example, but if Larry didn't agree with you, he could just turn that situation around, and he doesn't have to ask permission from anybody to talk. He just can talk for 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever he wants. And it happened.
Yeah, well, technically under Robert's rules, he's not supposed to. I'll just pass that along.
Okay,
Technically, if the presiding officer wants to speak on an issue, he has to step down as presiding officer.
yeah,
That's what Robert's rules says. That's never enforced, but that's what the rules say. And you're right, although I will also say on the other side of the coin, most of the mayors I've served with have rarely spoken on a substantive issue. Bob almost never did. I mean, probably a handful of times in the time he was mayor did he speak on an issue. Shane didn't speak very often. Kristen didn't speak very often. I'm not sure what Mark's record is because I've sworn off watching council meetings. Okay, so anyway, that's an issue obviously that people want to discuss. So we'll certainly keep that on the list of things. Staggered terms, that has come up a lot of times. And I will, just from the point of view of staff, just from my time and working with councils and working in Lewiston, staggered terms is a really good idea. It keeps us controllable. You don't have the situation where, you know, as how many people did you have this last year? 4 or 5?
It was 4, I believe.
4.
brand new counselors.
And at times it's been 5. At least one time I can remember 6. And I believe there was once when it was all 7. Number one, in that situation, number one, you've basically given up, the council's basically given up already for the first budget and handed it over to staff because they're still struggling with trying to even know how the system works. And the second, it creates a lot of difficulty on the staff. We had a lot of turnover my first year on the council. And at one point I remember leaning over to Kathy, and you know how at the first meeting of each session, they adopt all those rules about how things are going to do and who's going to be allowed to approve what and all that stuff. Leaned over to Kathy and I said, the first thing on the new council's agenda each year should be reaffirming the actions of the prior council, because we spent most of our time for the first 6 months revisiting stuff that the prior council had done.
Yeah.
So I think having some continuity would be very helpful. It does, however, complicate a lot of other issues. So anyway, I think staggered terms make sense. So that would be where I'm coming down. Other thoughts?
I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement, but I also think that the term should be extended a little bit longer,
Yeah,
2
well, if we go,
years.
which is another subject.
yeah, if we go to staggered terms, it raises other issues. And one of which is how do you stagger them? How often do you want to have elections? How do you want to structure it so that, I mean, if we stick with what we have now and go to staggered terms, one election would have the mayor on it, so everybody would be able to vote on that on a city ballot. The off mayoral election, you could potentially have 4 councilors running, which means only 4 wards would have something to vote on for the city. You could counterbalance that maybe with the at-large school committee person, but quite honestly, I don't think that's a very exciting. I don't get the impression that stirs people up a whole lot to go to the polls to vote for the citywide school committee member. So anyway, you run into those kinds of issues. So anyway, if we go staggered terms, the options there are 3-year terms with an election each year with 1/3 of the members up. That creates even bigger problems with making
Yeah.
sure everybody gets something to vote on. Or going 4 years with the mayor running in one election, and potentially if you added at large, that person running in the off year election, but that requires adding that at large person. So there seems to be interest in extending the term. I'm getting, nope.
Uh,
Patty?
What is the reason for extending the term if we change out every 2 years currently, right? Is it,
Yeah, I mean, you could
why not?
go with an
Make 2
election
years?
every year. I think the biggest concern there is that you then start. The original way the city's election system was set up was to avoid having a municipal election on a presidential election year. Because the feeling was it would be totally overshadowed and nobody would pay attention. So that's why city elections are always on non-presidential years. If you go to a two-year staggered term, then you have an election each year. So some of them will fall on presidential years.
Okay.
So that there's no way to do this, I guess, I'd like to keep the 2-year term. I don't want to see elections every year, but then I like the idea of staggered terms. Those are incompatible. Those are incompatible, I guess. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, they pretty much are.
Does not compute.
Yeah, well, I think is Portland's, all their council members are still at large. They have a mix of ward.
Yes.
I think they have a
do.
mix of ward and at large, so that they always have at least
Mhm.
one at large seat that's up each year.
Yeah.
In Bangor, everybody's at large, so you always have a citywide election with all the candidates up, or with the candidates running citywide. So staggered terms sounds like something we support. Maybe not quite sure yet how to do it.
Right.
But certainly going to a staggered term probably means either an election each year or going with something, probably a 4-year term, because 3 years I don't think works in a ward system.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about whether we want to consider an at-large city councilor. Auburn has one, right? Has
Yep.
two.
And they have 2, I believe. Yeah.
Auburn has 2. From my perspective, one of the problems that we have locally in Lewiston is that the wards are so small that you get a very small number of people electing somebody. Conversely, you have a small wards, which means that people have an easier potential contact with their ward representative. Some cities have mixed systems with some at large, some ward. Some cities, not very many, have a kind of semi-unique system where you have to run from a ward, but you're elected at large. Tucson, where I worked, had an even more unique system, which was that you were nominated by ward, but elected at large. But they also had a partisan system there.
Yeah.
So there are various ways you can mix and match that. But what are people's thoughts? So Linda, I think, feels pretty strongly that we should have at least one at-large council member. Other thoughts?
I like the idea of at-large councilors, plural. I'm not sure that having just one at-large councilor is necessarily a good idea. Is that going to be kind of competing with the mayor in that sense, that they're the only 2 elected citywide? At least the cities in Maine that I looked at, none of them had just one at-large councilor. They all had a minimum of 2. Which is what I would like to see if we go that route. But philosophically, I do like the idea of having at-large councilors.
What is the biggest reason for having an at-large or 2?
One reason would be just if we needed to balance out the council, obviously. If we ended up giving the mayor a vote, then you've got 8 voting members, so you need to think about adding another position. Given the fact that we already have 7 wards that are fairly small, does it make any sense to add an 8th ward to the city? Another reason I think that some people would give is that it counterbalances the parochialism of a ward system. I've never found that to be a terrible problem in Lewiston.
Oh.
I mean, most of the time, the counselors in Lewiston have obviously come from a ward, but they have not been solely ward oriented. That's not necessarily always the case. I think Auburn has had more of people being ward representatives who just pushed for their ward and pushed and screamed and shouted and scratched for their ward and didn't pay much attention to the rest of the city. You willing to comment on that, Dennis, from your experience over there? So the idea with the mixed system, I think, is to get both. You have that local person that can be connected to their constituents and represent that area of the community. And then you have some people who are elected who bring a wider perspective potentially to the council. This all gets further complicated when you get into situations where you have a minority population. In that you have to be careful not to structure your system in such a way as to make it impossible for those folks to have reasonable representation. So when I was in Texas, for example, when I was first in the city there, council was all elected at large. The Department of Justice came in and said, no, 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 no. You've got a significant minority population that's being disadvantaged by your electoral system. So you must go to a system that recognizes that. And they went to, I think, 5 wards and 2 at large or something like that. So they went to a mixed system. The other problem you get into is if we change the number of wards, if we either increase or decrease them, then we get into the problem of redrawing ward lines, which is a real mess.
Oh, yeah.
It's not been a political issue in Lewiston because everybody's taken the status quo as the starting point and done as little changes as possible. But even then, you have situations where potentially you end up with it. You have to look and say, where do the current councilors live? They're running for re-election. Do we want to district them out of their district that they were elected? No, we don't want to do that, but we also want to make sure it gets very complicated. So I would hate to mess with the current ward system. I'm sure Kathy would have a heart attack because she does all of the detailed work along with the people in IT who do mapping and stuff. So
I do like the idea of an extra input and another voice. You get more feedback, details, things like that. But I understand completely where you're coming from in regards to that.
And if we don't do redistricting or anything, and there's an at-large person, so they're voted in by everybody in the city of Lewiston. Well, what if we have 2 people in a certain ward already and they happen to be in that ward? That's just adding a third person in a ward that's already fully represented or whatever. I'm thinking Board of Appeals right now.
Right.
There's only 1 person per ward, sorry. Get confused. But
yeah, obviously whoever's elected at large is going to live in a ward because the whole city is divided into wards.
I love the current system. We've got 7 wards, 1 mayor. It will take care of a vote if somebody's absent for some reason. I mean, anybody can make a game of anything, but I think you're talking about a lot of money and making all these changes, and is it truly necessary at this point? So I would be a no vote on this whole situation, but that's where I'm at.
So obviously we're different opinions on.
Keep it simple.
We're different opinions about at large. I mean, I will tell you the only reason I would probably support an at large position is if we needed 1 more position on the council to counterbalance giving the mayor a vote. Otherwise, I agree with Patty that it just complicates the system if we try to do too much in terms of wards and changing that whole system. It's very deeply embedded in the system. Other thoughts, Patty?
Just a question on that. Why do you not want the mayor to have a vote?
I do want the mayor to have a vote.
Okay, just
You
as
were the-
tiebreaker, basically.
No, I wanted him to be able to vote on everything.
And you want a full, you're also looking for a full-term mayor, or I don't, that's a whole different subject, but
That's a
Nope.
different-
no
No.
full term, but just wanting to have a vote all the time.
I think that would give him
Or her.
or her, and this, yes, thank you, and assign a more clearly defined role. You know, there have been a wide range of people who've been mayors in Lewiston. Everywhere from very active to totally inactive. So that role, the role of the mayor is very undefined. And I think that can create potential issues. It could have, for example, when we had a strong mayor and a weak manager, that mayor can start exercising way more authority over the day-to-day operations of the city than you might want them to, unless you want to just go to a strong mayor system. So anyway, that's part of the problem that Portland's having right now, is that there's that lack of clear definition as to roles between the mayor and the city manager down there. And that's created nothing but confusion since they changed their charter. What was that now? Must be 12 years ago.
Oh, that long already? Wow.
Yeah, I think.
Does Biddeford still have a strong mayor system?
No, the only
No?
place that comes even close to it is, I think, Westbrook. No,
Westbrook, maybe. Yeah, maybe it's Westbrook I'm thinking of. Yeah.
but even there, I think they've changed recently.
Yeah.
Is it Waterville? Do they have, or?
Well, no, because the manager in Waterville has a great deal. It takes 2/3 of the council to remove the manager up there. So,
Well, bottom line is, if you give the mayor a vote, you're gonna come up 4-4 in the voting on a number of issues from time to.
that's why you would have to change the
That's why you gotta
composition.
do the
Yeah.
at-large.
Yeah. Yep. That's true.
So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul directly.
Well, the nice thing about that is if we did recommend that, that would be a charter revision that would have to go to a charter commission. So we don't have to make the final decision there. But I do think the council is looking for us to make at least some initial recommendations. Dennis,
I think I just flagged this, maybe that we probably want to have a conversation with the attorney, and maybe you know the answer to this, but if we were to put these out, let's say we put out the mayor votes, that would require a vote, I believe, of the public. And let's say that wasn't passed, or that was passed, excuse me, but the at-large position was not, right? We're talking about, it's almost like those two. I don't know if that question would have to go together.
yeah, I think that's why this would become a revision.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
When you do a charter revision, in effect, you take this entire document
Yeah.
and you rewrite it.
Yeah.
And the public gets to say yes or no.
For the whole thing.
They don't
right?
get to choose one from column A and two from column B. It's either all or nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
And those are so interrelated.
Yeah.
If you could do it as an amendment, you probably would have to do it as a single amendment.
Right.
But I think you're getting way into the probably substantive issues that go beyond just a minor amendment. Okay. So you guys, we should all be agreeing on everything. I don't understand. Let's see, what else do I have on my list here?
I think you may have passed. Are you going in order? We may have passed over the 20 to 18.
You're right, I may have passed that over. Is there any
And the
interest in
mayor's- Yep.
recommending that the age limit be changed?
Yes.
Not for me.
I advocated for that in 1979 and lost.
Right now, you have to be 20 years old to run for office, as opposed to 18.
I think you should be 18.
I agree.
I still go back to if you can get sent to Vietnam when you're 18, you should be able to vote.
You should be able to drink too at 21 or 18, right?
Yeah.
You either
Yeah.
all across the line or gotta pick and choose.
It should
There's a
Okay.
lot, I think a lot of maturity happens between 18 and 20, and I don't know,
Absolutely.
probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I think
I
you
speak
should
for
be
myself.
able to.
I think the actual age limit ought to be about 40, but I'll keep that. I can get away with that with this group.
Yeah.
Yes.
I say let the voters decide. The voters want to elect an 18-year-old, let them do
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Once in a while, you run into a Luke Jensen, bright young kid,
Yep.
bright young kid. And I think there's a lot of nice, bright kids that want to get involved. And if you want them to get involved, that may be a good way to do it.
Mhm.
You
Okay.
know, that's my thought.
Yep.
Jennifer, you agree?
I look at my own kids and at 17 and 19 and I'm struggling, I've got to admit. But
But when you were 18, Jen, you were ready.
oh, I'm glad you think I was. That means I fooled you good.
I was lucky. I had the only 30-year-old, 18-year-old son in the world. I used to tell him, you need to rebel. You know, his big rebellion was taking Latin in high school against his parents' recommendation.
I love it.
Jennifer, you gonna say something else, or?
Yeah, I guess I'm not convinced. I'm not really sold either way. I guess part of me is, yeah, you know what, if there's an 18-year-old that really wants to get into this, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm casting my vote and I'm looking at an 18, 19-year-old kid that maybe doesn't have enough life experience and things like that to talk about some of the issues, then, you know, I may not cast my vote, but it's up to the public.
Yeah, the one caveat I throw in, and I'm not sure there's all that much difference between 18 and 20. But the one caveat I'd throw in there is that there are an awful lot of people who are elected in Lewiston unopposed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you could easily have somebody who's 18 and immature be the only person on the ballot.
That's what concerns me.
I have served with
That's
a
the
few,
part that concerns me.
I have served with a few counselors who were well over the age of 18. Oh, believe me. Okay, enough of that.
Yes.
I know you are,
Okay.
but what am I?
Okay, let's see here now. There was some suggestion about salaries. We talked a little bit about that before. Those salaries are now set by ordinance. The charter simply indicates that they can be set by the council by ordinance and that they only go into effect after the next election. Do we want to think about making a recommendation on a salary for elected positions in Lewiston? Given that it's a political hot potato that councils often don't want to deal with. And it may help them.
I tried to get increases, and I knew I was getting off the council. And I tried just before I got off the council to get increases. I mean, you get, I can't remember what it is, $75 or something, or $100 or something like that to do the work you do. And you put in a lot of time as a counselor, you know, and a mayor puts in that much more. I think that they're getting like 2,700, I think, for a year.
I think so.
Like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, the amount of time they spend, you know, just the budget time, just the weeks on the budget. You can spend a couple whole weeks on just the budget. You know, that's a lot of time and energy right there.
Ed, are you suggesting that we just make a recommendation that it should be increased, or it should be increased to a particular amount? And not that it should be included in the charter like it was originally?
No, I don't think it should be in the charter because
I
that
agree.
makes it entirely too hard to change. But,
Right, yeah.
you know, it's been my experience that it's a political hot potato. And if it should be addressed, the councils tend not to want to address it because they don't want to be blamed for it. And it might give them some cover if we made a recommendation. And our recommendation could be either we think it should be increased. We don't know exactly how much. I'll leave that up to you. Or we could make a specific recommendation.
Mhm.
I know they're volunteer positions, but you are giving up your time with family and your own personal life and stuff like that. And I think that's worth something. And I'm not saying I want to make my living doing it. Like I'm not, if you gave a full-time position for mayor, I wouldn't run for it. But I'm just saying,
I'm with you on that one.
yeah. But do I think 3,500 versus the 27 is a reasonably good increase for that council position? Maybe so, maybe even 3,750 or something. I don't know. I haven't figured the numbers, but versus 2,700. Anyway,
Would it make some sense for us to ask Dennis to get somebody to do some checking around and see what other people are being paid?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else we need to talk about on mayor and council?
The mayor's appointment authority.
Appointment authority, yes, we mentioned, we touched on it a little bit. There's some difference of opinion. My preference would be that the mayor continue to have the authority to appoint, but that the mayor's appointments be confirmed by the council. I think as it stands right now, people get really bent out of shape about certain appointments that the mayor makes and not being consulted and not having a role, and how could they do that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not always. It depends very much on how the mayor operates. Some mayors are more inclusive in that process and seek out advice and suggestions from people. Others just make the appointments. Patty argues the mayor is the mayor. He gets to do what he or she gets to do what he or she wants to do, and comes with the nature of the job. My theory is also tied in with the notion of giving the mayor a vote on the council. So it's kind of giving up a little bit of power in one area and picking it up in another area. Comments?
I think that's where I am. Let's give the mayor the vote, but let's have the council confirm appointments.
I'm in opposition again. The one thing about being a mayor, one of your privileges is to appoint people to different committees. And again, elections have consequences, and that's, the rule of that. And now you're taking city council to take the one thing that the mayor really has power over, and you're giving that to the city council. You're making the city council have the last say on the mayor's appointments.
Yeah,
So
the council would have the ability to say no. I think it would be an unusual circumstance, but that would be my guess. The mayor would still have the opportunity to effectively nominate somebody for the position. And I've gone with that because I think it's easier for one person to make those initial decisions. If you had the council doing that whole process, it would take a lot of time.
Yep.
And potentially become quite controversial.
Mhm.
I'll back Patty on this.
Okay.
Are we talking like all boards and committees, like planning board or board of appeals type level versus like a committee like this, or any of the ad hoc? Are there various? Because I guess I almost see like planning board, board of appeals, mayor makes the appointment, council confirms it. But I feel like there are some shorter term, more of the ad hoc committees that if it's the mayor's ad hoc committee, the mayor appoints them. But I know the council over the years has created more committees. So I guess I feel like it kind of varies depending on what type, the structure of the board or the committee that is being considered.
Yeah, I don't think we should take away the authority of the mayor to appoint ad hoc committees that he wants to appoint. But the planning board, in a lot of ways, the planning board has a tremendous influence over the future of the city. And I could see where, you know, if we have a mayor and he has a 4-year term and he gets elected for 8 years and he appoints everybody on the planning board and he appoints people of only one position, one thought, which is either develop everything and no rules, or don't let anything get built, you could have real problems, because I've seen that happen. When I was in Tucson, to talk about my own history, we effectively had 2 comprehensive plans. And after each election, we changed. First comprehensive plan was pro-growth. The second comprehensive plan was no growth. And in the whole time I worked in the city of Tucson, I think I was there for 8 years, maybe a little less. I think I worked for 15 council members, because in that period of time, it was maybe even more than that. In that period of time, they elected a whole new council. They recalled 5 of them, 5 of the 7. They elected the new people into those 5 positions, and they voted them all out in the next election. So it was a very politically divided community because it was growing so fast. And there were literally 2 groups in town: build everything wherever you want, however you want it, and don't build anything. And it became very, very controversial. So it can be very important who gets appointed to the planning board, whether they're balanced and moderate, or, you know, on one side or the other.
I agree. When Roger and I were on the planning board together, we basically ran this town.
Oh, you know it.
Roger,
Nobody-
your thoughts?
Nobody else knew that though, huh? Yeah. Just the one observation, I think there's at least one city in Maine where the mayor's appointments do not have to be confirmed by the council, but the council can, by some kind of supermajority, vote down a nomination. So the council has some check, even though they don't have to confirm all. No, I'm still where if we give the mayor the vote, I think that the mayor should get confirmation from the council. I mean, you know, the Senate has to confirm most of the president's major appointments. I believe the state Senate has to confirm certain gubernatorial appointments. So I just think that if the mayor works well with the council, very few of the mayor's appointments would be, you know, would fail to be confirmed, and it avoids some of this hanky-panky we see with the ad hoc committees.
What hanky-panky specifically are you referring to?
Oh, there have been over the years a lot of sniping in the background over the whole issue of the mayor's ability to make appointments, and who the mayor appoints and how those appointments are made. And at some point, regardless of what we decide here, we ought to just clarify this whole issue of ad hoc committees, because there are ad hoc committees that the council, that the mayor establishes, which I view as kind of advisory to the mayor, and through the mayor to the council in the city. And then you have other committees that are established by the council, and those committees that are short-term or ad hoc usually specify an appointment method in them. So the big one I'm thinking about, the most recent one, was the housing committee. That was a huge hot potato with some very hard feelings on the part of it got to the point where it's the only, when they adopted the resolve establishing the committee, which the council did, they required each appointee to be separately voted on by the council at the time it was established. So you had 12 people on it, I think. They had to vote 12 times because there was concern about who was going to be appointed and who was doing what, all this kind of stuff. So it does get, I mean, and I know when I think when Larry was president, was council, was mayor, there was a big flap about who got to do what. That
Yeah.
got the city attorney involved. And so it's just been a very unclear portion of the charter and of the procedure. So I think we ought to just clarify it. If the mayor's, if an ad hoc committee is only going to be appointed by the mayor, then let's say it can only be by the mayor.
Was
Yeah,
the committee that was just elected or chosen, was that done by Mark here? Was that an ad hoc committee? The
Yes.
poverty thing?
The poverty one that you're talking about?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
That was
read
done
that.
by Mark, but I think one of the things that Mark is careful about doing, which not all mayors have been, is he does kind of talk to the council about it and get their input before he makes decisions. That's not always been the case. So I can see a situation where the council wants to set up a committee to look at something. They formulate the committee, they set it up, they say the mayor gets to appoint the members. The mayor thinks it's a bad idea. And he appoints a bunch of people who either are against whatever the council's interested in or don't even bother meeting. I don't think that's really happened, but
Mhm.
it could. And it's been a point of contention and confusion more than anything else.
I
And
thought
I do think Roger's right. We ought to make a distinction between the charter created positions on the planning board and the Board of Appeals and some of these other ones. So, Dennis, could you get us a copy of the list of all of these appointment thingies and who does them?
Absolutely.
Because it's a mess, and some of it is because, for example, when we enter into interlocal agreements, that interlocal agreement between Lewiston and Auburn will normally specify who's on the board, and that may not be a mayoral appointment. So it gets very confusing.
I do want to say that Mark killed it with his choice of candidates for the diversity was great. And I was very impressed with the list of people on that committee.
Yeah, and as I said, I think Mark has gone out of his way to solicit opinions. And it hasn't been a situation where he just appointed people without consultation. So let's see, where are we here now? It's moving right along because I'm going to cut this off at 6:30.
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
President of the council, obviously, we're going to need to coordinate that with whatever we do with the mayor and the election system.
Mhm.
Forfeiture of office. We spent a lot of time talking about this last time. We used to have the language in there about moral turpitude, an offense involving moral turpitude. The feeling of the last group that looked at this is that that was not clear enough, that it was just not well defined. And if you look at the model charter stuff, you basically see that they start quoting court cases. Well, this isn't. So it's not, there's not a clear, bright line. So that is what that committee wanted to establish, was a clear, bright line, which basically in this definition is if you're convicted of a felony in Maine, that would pretty much disqualify you. So there's some feeling that that's too restrictive.
That's a line.
That's a line.
That's a clear one. Yep.
There's some feeling that it's too restrictive. Part of the reason I think there's been this complication is there's no enforcement mechanism to the forfeiture language in our charter. Talked about that earlier. It is not clear if you say, okay, person X, you've committed a crime of moral turpitude, you're off the council, and that person goes, no, I didn't.
Right.
How is that resolved?
Yeah.
You have to go to court,
Mhm.
which is going to be really messy. So
Yeah.
I think putting in some language that makes it very clear that the council is the judge of this, and maybe even create a supermajority if necessary, so that there's not political issues coming to play here would make some sense.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. The second thing is, I will also tell you that having lived through some of this stuff, somebody can do something and refuse to resign from the council, and it's going to take you 18 months to get a decision out of a court. So you have somebody who's been accused of pedophilia. And that person refuses to step down. There is nothing you can do. And that's a very, very uncomfortable circumstance. We had that situation in Bangor where we had a council member who was accused of forgery, who for a chunk of time refused to step down. Part of his bail conditions, it was he forged my signature claiming that I had agreed to a contract to pay him for something. He refused to step down, and he was actually under a bail condition that he could have no contact with me or the finance director. He eventually came to grips with reality and resigned. But you get those situations where somebody's done something, but you haven't reached the point where they go, I don't know if there's a way to deal with that, but I'd be interested in poking around and seeing if we could have something. And it may be that if we go back to that notion of moral turpitude and throw in an enforcement mechanism and maybe come up with something less rigid than even a conviction. I don't know, just something worth looking at. I've seen employment contracts where if somebody is indicted or indicted for a crime, that can be a grounds upon a separate investigation by the organization to determine whether there's evidence, enough evidence. But let's throw that out there as some stuff to think about. Reactions. I guess my suggestion would be, let's go back to the moral turpitude stuff and put in an enforcement provision and say that ought to take care of it, at least as a starting point.
It's pretty much what the model charter has,
Yeah,
as I recall. Yeah.
with the footnotes about this court said this and this court said that about what moral turpitude means.
Yeah, yeah.
Steve, you're looking thoughtful.
I'm in agreement. I think there's, people tend to do the right thing, even after they've done the wrong thing. That's going to be a rare case that somebody bucks the system and tries to hold their ground.
Yeah.
On a related issue, with 4 minutes left to go, do we want to talk about a recall provision?
That's gonna be longer than 4 minutes.
We currently do not have a recall provision. There is a standard in state law that doesn't apply to us since we have a charter, which basically is only, you can be recalled from office only if you steal from the municipality that you're elected official in, something like that. My experience has been most recalls are not for behavioral reasons, they're for policy reasons. And I just think that's a misuse of the process, particularly in a community, and may change if we decide to go to 4-year terms. My thinking may change, but particularly in a community where you have an election every 2 years for everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's not necessary. And again, if you look around and you see most of the recall, people are being recalled because they voted to fire the police chief. They
Bunch of raised
voted
taxes.
to do this, they voted to do that. And I don't think that's appropriate, but that's kind of my feeling, having watched it.
Yeah, I would not advocate for a recall provision.
Anybody
No.
else?
No,
Okay, like I say, if we go with 4-year terms, we might want to revisit
Yeah,
that because then that's,
It is a little different then, yep.
then it is a little different. Anything else people wanted to talk about in the next 2 minutes?
I want to thank you very much for getting to the meat.
Well, at least we've had some preliminary discussion. It's obvious we're
Yep.
going to have more discussion about some of these issues. Dennis, you're recording this, right? So it will be available somewhere so I can take a look through it and maybe make some notes of the discussion and what we agreed on and what we still have to discuss on.
Sorry, my dog was mauling me there for a second. The video, and he's coming back. The video will be posted right on YouTube and be able to be accessible to you in the public. Probably this evening.
Yeah, because I'd like to put together kind of a cheat sheet of where our discussion has come down or not come down, which issues we've pretty well decided on or feel comfortable with, which ones we don't. Good, and we will check with Francis about his availability on the 5th, and if that's not going to work, we'll look at the 3rd. And I'll work with Dennis and his folks about trying to get something out to start soliciting opinion.
Okay.
Okay,
Good.
Good.
anything else we need to talk about? With that, I guess I will just simply say we're adjourned.
Yay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Night.
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 Take care.
Dennis, I'll talk to you later.